Hello and welcome to Countryside. We've got a varied selection of topics to be talking about this week, John, haven't we?
Yes, we do, Simon, and we try to bring the changes every week and try to cover the interests, wide as they are. For instance, I'm talking this week to Inspector Andy Neen about making Manx farms more secure in the light of some of the crime in the UK.
Because I think it's an easy-ish target, he says, isn't it?
We are extremely vulnerable, Simon. We're open, we can't lock our farmyards up like a workshop. So we've got to be very, very careful what we do and try and help the police in keeping things to a very, very low level. And Simon, you've been involved too in talking to the safety officers about fire in the countryside.
Yes, I talked to Phil Bennett from St John Ambulance. Obviously this time of year where barbecues are getting started, people are camping in tents, and it's quite a risky time and an easy time for fires to get started in the country, isn't it?
Well, I think it is, Simon. I don't think people realise just how easy it is when the sun is shining, when the grass is dry, and a very, very simple little fire can get out of hand very, very quickly.
Yeah, and it's we've seen it firsthand on farms to do with hay and moist and wet hay, haven't we, John?
And there's nothing worse than a farm fire.
No. And also keeping in the countryside, of course, a lot of wartime activity round the Manx countryside and the skies above. And I spoke to Ivor Ramsden from the Manx Aviation and Military Museum. There's been some anniversaries of plane crashes recently, and Ivor was talking about some specific sites around the Isle of Man where the old radar stations were, and wreckage of planes can still be found.
And it is interesting, Simon, and of course with the 100 years of the outbreak of war, the First World War, it's aroused a lot of memories and brought a lot of history out to the fore. And actually, Simon, particularly in the countryside, we're walking all over history, things that have gone on that we've either forgotten or never knew about in the first place.
No, and there's always something that, particularly close to the Isle of Man as well, that makes it more interesting for us.
That's right.
And it's that time of year as farmers, it's been good, touch wood, so far for them with the seed side of things.
It really has been a very, very good, it's been a good winter and a good spring, Simon, and it's still going, it's still doing well. And one of the crops that I see absolutely flourishing down in your part of the world, on the north of the island, is the winter wheat. That's the crop that really brings about the flour that supplies the bread in the Isle of Man. And as a Manx farmer, I must say I'm very proud of that. It's become a very, very specialised operation now, and that's why Sean Sparling came over to talk to the Manx growers about developments now in actually getting the very best out of the wheat crops that they're growing.
Well, Sean is an agronomist.
That'll do, Simon. We'll know.
We'll let him explain in this week's edition of Countryside. Here it is. It's springtime, it's getting near the summer, people will be getting barbecues out and camping in tents and camper vans, John, and it's a worrying time when the grass is dry and there's hay about, isn't it?
It is, Simon, and I think people don't really always appreciate just how dry the countryside can get sometimes with hot, bright sunshine and the least bit of fire and a breeze, and it's gone out of control in a few seconds.
Yes, well, I spoke to Phil Bennett, who's the commercial training and marketing manager for St John Ambulance. I began by asking Phil if courses in fire safety management were becoming more popular.
Well, certainly that a lot of people are aware of the problems and issues that they need to think about within their premises, and we get people coming on to our courses from various working environments. Done a course recently where we had somebody from a factory, somebody else from an office environment, somebody coming from a scrapyard. So there are a lot of businesses who do use us on the island, yes.
It's such an important thing, isn't it? Because when you look at statistics about fires and how much of it can be prevented and how many lives can be saved by somebody having a bit of knowledge.
That's right. It's the life that we need to look at. A lot of people look at fires and say, the value, it's insured, it doesn't really matter. No, it's actually the lives that can be lost due to fire. And simple precautions, simple common sense measures can make your environment safe, and somebody taking ownership of making sure their premises are actually run in a safe way and doing a very good risk assessment of their premises or their working environment, looking at what the dangers are, how do we manage combustible materials, how do we manage heat sources, and how do we try and keep them separated so that we don't have a problem.
Do you get many farmers on it? Because there's lots of potential for fires on farms.
There is, that's right. If I'm really honest, I can't remember whether we had a farmer on. I don't ever remember teaching a farmer on the course, and as you say, that is one environment where there is a potential for some major fires, where they've got the storage of crops, etc. They've got a lot of storage of fuels and different agricultural equipment. And it's just thinking about how they safely store them.
And what about, I know you mentioned before that, people are having barbecues. Maybe it's an idea to think before you get it lit that, have some sand or something
that's right,
beside
yeah, that's right. And think of also at the end of it as well, is not just lighting it, but what surface, these instant barbecues, is thinking about what surface you put them on. I've seen them in boots of cars where there's carpeted surfaces, and I've seen one person...
What, lit?
Yeah. So, I mean, you've got to think, because it was a windy day, they thought they'd put it in the boot of the car and it would be safe, and then wondered why the carpet started burning and that sort of thing, so in the boot of the car. So think about where you're lighting it, make sure that it's safe away from anything else that might ignite from it. So again, obviously fuels and petrols that might be around. So you might be out with a few motorbikes and got a jerry can of petrol to top the off-road bikes up. Don't stick the barbecue next to the jerry can, that sort of thing. But also think about how you dispose of these instant barbecues at the end as well. You're very keen on the countryside, as I know, Simon, and it's thinking about, don't just dig a hole out in the middle of a bit of heathland there and bury the hot coals, because obviously the roots of the vegetation will actually start burning. So you could actually end up with a heath fire very easily from a barbecue being buried because it hasn't actually cooled down properly.
What about people camping? Tents, I suppose, are a big risk as well. Lots of flammable stuff.
That's
and
right.
People using the sort of gas, as it used to be, equipment for cooking.
That's right. And the other thing to consider, if you're lighting a barbecue, is don't light it inside a tent. And sadly, we've seen last year somebody on a campsite in the UK there lost their life because they actually lit their barbecue in the tent because it was raining. They decided to light the barbecue in the tent, and of course the fumes from the barbecue knocked them out. So do consider that it's in a well ventilated place that you're actually doing the cooking as well.
So lots of potential for fires, even just recreational people out in the country.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, if you imagine taking a barbecue or any sort of heating equipment inside a tent, got to make sure that it's well vented and it's not going to actually set the fabric of the tent afire.
Now, the St John Ambulance, they do the life-saving courses, first aid courses, plus this fire marshal training that you do. If people want to get involved in it?
Yeah, if they want to give us a ring on 674387 and ask for either Linda or Phil, we'll give advice on what courses we offer, and if there is anything that suits your needs, we'll give you the directions to the right course. You can email us for information as well on info, that's info, @sja.org.im.
Phil Bennett, the Commercial Training and Marketing Manager for St John Ambulance Isle of Man. Well, in the introduction to the programme, John, you mentioned an agronomist. What's that?
Well, this man, I know his name was Sean Sparling, and that was the very question I asked him, Simon. What is an agronomist?
It's a question we get asked a lot by farmers, actually. My job, I don't sell anything. The only thing I do is sell advice. I don't sell products. So I am employed by the growers over in the UK, around 25,000 acres I look after. I'm employed to do the job of a doctor to the crops. I'm a crop doctor, if you like. So my daily job is to walk around their fields, diagnose problems, give them solutions to problems, recommend the solution to those problems. So it's everything to do with fertiliser choice, seed choice, cultivations, chemical use, fungicides, insecticides, trace elements, everything to do with the growing of the crop. That's my job. That's what I do.
So when you come onto the Isle of Man then and you find a very different scale of operation, is that a problem to you?
No, not in the slightest. My farm sizes vary from, I have a 120 acre farm right up to 3,500 acre farms. And it doesn't make a difference whether the field's a 10 acre field or a 200 acre field. The problems are still the same. It just means they're on a bigger scale in a 200 acre field. It makes no difference whatsoever. The same principles apply in every respect.
Now, for some of our non-farming listeners, just tell us a bit of what the problems that you speak about, what you face.
In layman's terms, if you imagine going to the doctors because you feel poorly, and the doctor has a look at you, he examines you, and he said, well, this is the problem, this is what's going to treat that problem, this will put you right. Come back in a fortnight, we'll see how you're doing. That's what I do for crops. I walk into the field, I assess them for diseases and bugs and pests and green fly on your roses, for example. And I tell them what we'll deal with that problem, and I look at it every week, and I make sure that the problem is dealt with and goes away. That's my job. I need to get them to harvest in a good yield. That's my job.
Now, you say things are developing. Are you finding new diseases?
No, but what we are finding is existing diseases which are becoming resistant to the existing ways that we control them. So fungicides, for example, are starting to be not as effective on the diseases. The diseases are mutating and becoming more savvy. They're working out how to get round the fungicides that we use. And it's the same in pests, in weeds, in diseases. All of these things, they evolve and they work out how to survive, because at the end of the day, any living organism, its only aim is to survive and produce progeny. So that's what they do. They evolve to get round us.
And is chemistry the only antidote?
No, I'm very, very vocal in the UK. We have a farming programme over in Lincolnshire that I contribute to. And I'm very vocal that certain things in isolation aren't the answer. It's like everything. You have to have a holistic approach. And that is cultural methods. It's integrated pest management, integrated crop. We work alongside predators to control insects, for example. We only spray where it's the last resort. We let thresholds, we work to thresholds. If we have to do it, we do it, but we like to work with nature rather than against nature. And then, of course, the organic side as well, where they use little or no pesticides. But we all have a common aim, and that is to protect the environment and produce food. That's what
Once
we're
upon a
after.
time, we depended very, very largely on rotation.
Yeah.
And that seemed to be quite an effective tool in our fathers' and our grandfathers' time. Is there still a place for that in modern farming?
Absolutely. This is one of my big things. In the UK, we've got very used to monocultures almost, and wheat rate rotations. That's no good. We need to go back and we need to get everything working for us. You need a break crop, you need cover crops, you need something to put green manures back into the ground. We need to give the land a break from straw, and we need to give them a break from certain monoculture crops, because we're building up all those problems for ourselves. Diseases, pests and everything else. So for me, rotation is the only way we're going to go forward in the future. We have to get back to spring cropping, winter cropping, rotational ploughing, and we have to learn how to farm again, because the reliance has been far too heavy on chemicals over the past few years.
I think there will be a lot of people who will be perhaps surprised and very comforted to hear you speak like that, as people who are concerned about the amount of chemicals we do use. And this is a way, and it would be a sustainable way, wouldn't it?
Yeah, sustainability is the only way we're going to continue farming. I mean, I work with plant protection products. I work with them all the time, and I know that a lot of the stuff which is said about them is wrong. I know there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of people who are frightened about something they shouldn't be frightened of. And it's perspective. You need to get a perspective on things. And one of the best things, I talk to a lot of schools over in the UK and children about farming and what we do. And you use analogies that people don't forget. And one of those analogies is that there are more things that can hurt you in 1 cup of coffee than there are from pesticide residues in the food you will eat in an entire year. So perspective is key to everything. Without plant protection products, we will be overrun by pests, diseases and weeds, and food starts to run out. And that's a big thing. We need to eat.
The old maxim is still true, isn't it? A little knowledge is dangerous.
Absolutely. And in the wrong hands, it's absolutely downright terrifying.
Well, there, Sean Sparling, very, very well versed in his field of agronomy and advising Manx farmers now. A very, very complex procedure now, growing winter wheat, which produces the flour that we use here on the Isle of Man.
We've said it the last couple of weeks, haven't we? And it's still maintained it up to last week, certainly. The weather was perfect for doing sowing crops, wasn't it?
It really is, Simon, and it's really showing now where the winter wheat crops, particularly if you travel on the north of the island, they're looking very, very healthy indeed. And the prospect of a good harvest is all there, but it's a long way to go yet.
Yes, we've ploughed the fields and scattered.
Manx Radio's Countryside is brought to you by NFU Mutual.
Well, anybody reading the farming press in recent months will have read time and again of the activities of criminals, really, in the countryside in the UK. All sorts of things are happening. Not very long ago, a farmer missed, I think it was 7 or 8 heifers out of a shed. Things like that don't happen here on the Isle of Man, thank goodness. But I did ask Inspector Andy Neen how farmers could make their premises and their property more secure.
I wouldn't go onto any farmer's street and tell them how to run their business. But all we can suggest is ways that to protect themselves and their property so that they're not distracted from their main business, which is farming, and by minor thefts or problems arising from criminals.
But a farmyard and a farm generally is different to a workshop. You can't lock it all up and go home at night secure.
No, we do appreciate that. There's a heck of a lot of very valuable and expensive equipment. I mean, I wouldn't hazard to guess how much a tractor or a trailer's cost, but these are all things that if they've got high value to you, you're paying a lot of money for, they've got a value to a thief as well. So that's what just what I ask is people is to have one eye on how they store things, where they store things. If something's got a key and a lock, please take a couple of moments to use it. If you're relocating an oil tank, have a think about maybe moving it to in sight of your farmhouse, out of the sight of somebody casually driving by. Just little tweaks that don't obstruct your working day, but help to protect your property.
Now, you mentioned oil, and oil thefts seem to be fairly regular. I don't think we seem to be hearing about them. And there are large fuel tanks on farms, either red and white diesel.
Yes.
And so
yeah. I mean,
they're tempting for a thief.
It's become apparent when we have had thefts of diesel. We've had diesel go this year. We've had diesel go from a couple of horse boxes out the west. Very big capacity. Price of diesel, as we all would appreciate, is always rising. So what we say, there are products out there that inhibit the removal of diesel. Have a think about that. Use locking caps. Anything that make it a little bit harder for somebody going around on spec. That's all we're asking you to do.
Now, you mentioned horse boxes.
Yes.
The thieves are keen on these as well, aren't they? And maybe not so much in the Isle of Man, but UK it's prevalent. And it's hard to identify a horse box when there's so many of them about.
I think what's become apparent is that the farming community, country people, are busy people, and because the Isle of Man is, and I've got to say, it is still a very, very safe place to be, they don't necessarily think security first and foremost, but if you buy a new bit of kit and it'll have serial numbers on it, write them down somewhere. And remember where you've written them down. So if something did go missing, at least we can identify that particular kit. We do have links with the UK, so if we've got identifying marks, we can get things circulated nationally. So if a police force in England, Wales or Scotland comes across a trailer, a tractor, they can check and we can trace it back to you. So that's what I'd ask you to do is just, if you get a new bit of kit, it's got a serial number, keep that serial number somewhere safe away from that piece of equipment. And then if the worst happens, at least we've got a chance to recover it for you.
One of the things that's developing in these modern times is access to the countryside.
Yes.
A lot of people now are using footpaths that probably wouldn't have been used as frequently before. People do see a lot more in the countryside now than they used to, and opportunists may be using that sort of opportunity to see what's lying about.
That's right. Think about where you store things, basically. Does it need to be in the public eye? Does it need to be somewhere where somebody passing who you may not want them to see something? Just think about where you put it. When I'm not for one moment suggesting that at the end of the working day, after you work long hours, you lock every single item up. That's impractical. But I think there needs to be one thought on, well, if that piece of kit wasn't there tomorrow, could I do tomorrow's work? And it is relatively rare. What I would say is, if it does happen to you, don't just shrug your shoulders and think we're not interested. Let us know. A prime example was, we dealt in the West, we dealt with a couple of young fellas who'd stolen a couple of batteries from some farm equipment. During the course of that inquiry, we became aware of other offences they'd committed which hadn't been reported. Now, as it turned out, we were able to find the losers, the agreed parties, and we managed to get this kit back to them. Sometimes we do end up with property we recovered from thieves, and we don't know where it's come from. And unless we know about a problem, we can't do anything about it. Please don't ever see it as a waste of time informing us. Unless we know about a situation, there's nothing we can do about it. There's one thing I would like to mention, John, while we're on. Recent bit of work we did with the NFU. I know there's a lot of people out in the districts who insure themselves with the NFU. We've written a short pamphlet with some crime reduction ideas, crime prevention ideas. I know the NFU have pushed that out to all their customers. There's copies at every police station. So if you're interested in just having a look, just pop into your local police station. At the front counter, there's copies of these pamphlets. Take one. Just, there may be one idea that you might find helpful. but please take one away with you.
Well, there, Inspector Andy Neen, with good words of advice for those of us who work and live in the countryside about just making ourselves just a little bit safer.
Aye, the world's changed slightly, John.
Well, it has, Simon. It's a great pity that those sort of things go on now. And do you know the sad thing, Simon, that when things are taken off a farm, they can only be of use to another farmer, and that really is a sad thing among the farming community.
Let's move on to our last item on this week's programme, and it concerns the countryside, but also the Manx Aviation and Military Museum down at Ronaldsway here in the Isle of Man. I spoke to Ivor Ramsden from the museum about scars around the Manx countryside from wartime days gone by.
We've had the 70th anniversary of a bad plane crash down near the chasms in the south of the island. Just a barren hillside, really. But it's a good excuse for a nice walk in the country. Go down there, pay your respects to the 11 people who died. Have a look at the memorial that we put up there. It's adjacent to the main footpath between Fisted and the Sound. So it's quite a well-trodden footpath. Nice black granite memorial there.
Well, because some people think of, don't want to know anything about it, yet there's so many aviation enthusiasts that these sort of things in the countryside appeal to.
Well, yeah, that's right. There are quite a lot of people who go around visiting these crash sites. There are a number of books been published on crash sites all over the British Isles, including the Isle of Man, which actually give you the grid references for the crashes. A lot of the crash sites on the island, there's nothing left to see, literally nothing, not even a mark in the ground now, but several of them you can see the holes in the ground or the grooves in the ground where these aircraft have hit, and still on a couple of them you can find remnants of the aircraft, only small parts but parts nevertheless. An example is an American Flying Fortress bomber that crashed up on North Barule on the 23rd of April 1945.
Now the Flying Fortress, I think that was featured in the Memphis Belle film, that sort of film, quite a big plane, wasn't it?
Yeah, big 4-engine bomber, and yeah, that's right, a lot of people will be familiar with the type of aircraft from various films about American Air Force operations in the Second World War. This was unusual because it had 31 people on board, mainly ground crew who were being taken over to Northern Ireland for a few days' leave. The war was nearly at an end. These guys were starting to relax a little bit. On a simple flight over to Ireland, they came to meet an early death, sadly, on North Barule.
That wasn't the first crash on North Barule, was it?
There's been a number of crashes up there. Most of them were British or Royal Air Force Avro Anson aircraft, some of them based at Derby, but most of them were based over in the UK. But about 9 months before this particular Boeing Flying Fortress crash, there was an American Liberator bomber crashed on the same hillside, or on the same hill, the other side. I think there were 5 guys killed on that one. So all these crashes tend to be victims of what we know as Manannan's cloak, just low cloud. A lot of these guys were supposed to be flying at 5,000 feet to clear any high ground in the west of Scotland or the lakes or wherever, but I guess they must have dropped down in height to do some sightseeing or something of that nature.
But I mean, as well as this, there's bits and pieces still around the Isle of Man. Obviously the control towers, you can still see it at Derby and places like that, the old towers there and the runways. Andreas, which of course you've got to be careful because they're private land. But there are other bits that are of interest to people from the wartime or aviation?
There's an amazing amount of stuff still visible on the land. Yeah, I mean, probably some of the most obvious ones, when you know where to look, are the island's old radar stations. There are 4 of them. The one that's probably most accessible is the one near Cregneash, just on the hilltop above Cregneash. There's one at Scarlet, one at Derby, one at Bride. And between them, we've got the best preserved radar installations in the British Isles, surprisingly. It's not the sexiest of subject, unfortunately, radar, so there's no great move to preserve these things. But by the very nature of these things, they're made out of thick, reinforced concrete. They're not going to fall down, and they do make very, very effective sheds for farmers, so obviously it's in the farmers' interests to look after them. So they'll be here for a long time to come. But they can be recognised, particularly if, let's look at the one at Scarlet, for example. If you take the coast path round Scarlet, you can see them just inland from the coast. just big humps and bumps in the fields. And at Scout there's also some of the old barrack buildings, which are just simple brick-built structures, no roofs on them anymore, but the basic buildings are still there.
So people out and about might have a look at some of these sites and see something that's maybe been raked up by the winds or something like that, and might be of use to yourselves here at the museum. But of course, if they do find something, they can contact you, but they've got to have a degree of caution, I suppose, Ivor?
Yeah, that's a good point. There is an awful lot, a scary amount of live ordnance, ammunition and grenades and things like that hidden away in various places on the island, and not really hidden away deliberately, just lost over the years or littering the hillsides where some of these aeroplanes have crashed. Some of this stuff is still very, very dangerous. I would stress, if anybody finds anything that looks like a bullet or a shell or a hand grenade even, leave it where it is. Tell the police, let them worry about it. Don't you worry about having your arms blown off, because I'm sure it hurts an awful lot. We don't want them at the museum. Please don't bring them to the museum. It has happened in the past, and it's a very frightening experience when somebody puts a hand grenade on the desk in front of you. Fortunately, we've never had a live one.
Ivor Ramsden from the Manx Aviation and Military Museum is enthusiastic as ever. And, love it or hate it, like we said, there's still a lot of interest in that sort of thing, isn't it, about the past?
There is, Simon, and I think the older we get, the more we appreciate, what's gone before us. Talking about crashes on the Manx countryside, there are 2 gate pillars built on Bollawillian on the roadside that are completely out of keeping with all the other gateways. An old peel man told me that once upon a time a plane had actually crashed in that field, and when they came to take it out, they had to remove the gate pillars and they replaced them with these 2 stone pillars. So we're walking all over history, Simon.
Couldn't fly the plane back out.
No, not after it came down like that, you couldn't.
Oh, well. Well, I've just got time to tell you about the invitation to exhibit at the major Food and Drink Festival here in the Isle of Man. It'll be the Royal Manx Agricultural Show on the 7th and 8th of August in Ockello, and also the Isle of Man Food and Drink Festival at the Villa Marina Gardens on the 19th and 20th of September. If you want to exhibit or be part of that, you need to ring 685 856, that's 685 856, or contact Audrey Fowler at gov.im, and that's got to be in by the 30th of April.
Manx Radio's Countryside is brought to you by NFU Mutual.
Well, I hope you enjoyed Countryside this week. John, you never know what we're going to get for next week.
We hope they enjoyed every week, Simon, and we do our best to bring up topics of interest from the countryside. So just watch this space to see what we'll bring about next week, Simon.
Yes, that's all from this Countryside podcast. We'll see you next week.